Hi guys, today going to be making a kind of lean-to with a turf roof. So it'd fit in well on the kind of farmer's homestead or a kind of hidden cache held by bandits. So quite a versatile piece of terrain. And to start with, going to get a foam core base and some tongue depressors that we've cut the ends off. And then we're going to take some small pieces of balsa wood, carve them to look like timber beams, and cut an approximately 45-degree angle at the top, so that we have one longer support and one shorter one. And then connecting them together with hot glue, we're going to make two frames. And using one of the depressors as a guideline for the length, we're going to glue them onto the base and then start attaching the planks on the top to make a very kind of crude shelter. And then we're going to take our planks of wood and glue them connecting the two pieces on the top to make a roof. And I'm envisioning this piece as a kind of wilderness supply cache, so there's going to be some wood, some timber, and some kind of rocks and maybe some crates inside. But for now, just build up the roof, and it doesn't matter if there's a gap because we're going to cover it with sculptor mod later. And I added 2 bits of balsa wood to the back of the supports. Then, taking some scrap bits of foam core and styrofoam, we're going to build up some bulk on the back and the side of the model. So it's going to be covered by turf, over the roof, and on 2 sides of it. And most of these scrap pieces came from beveling the base itself. Next, we're going to mix up some sculptor mold, and give it a stir until it's still quite lumpy, and then we're going to plaster this over all the areas we want the turf to be. And ideally we use this step to cover up any unsightly gaps and joins and cover up all the scrap foam core we use to bulk it up. And just smear that all around the side and the top. And as long as you have it kind of lumpy, it shouldn't just fall through any of the gaps in the planking. And we want it to have kind of a smooth finish, so when it's partially dry, maybe half an hour to an hour later, just go in with a wet finger and you can smooth out any of the lumpy bits. And this will help get rid of any crevices that might have appeared while it was drying. And we want to keep some of the lumpiness, but overall we don't want to have any weird kind of hard edges or knobbly bits sticking out. Next, mixing up some basing grit. This is the standard recipe of flock, black gesso and PVA, and you can add a few drops of water if you need it to flow a little bit better. But do be a little bit careful when adding water because it does suddenly become a lot thinner. And we're going to apply that all over the sculptor mold, but it doesn't matter if we miss a few places because that just looks a lot more like smooth mud. But we want to make sure we do all the edges, as that's the area where it's more likely to be seen through any of the static grass. And while that's still wet, you can poke a few small pebbles and stones into it. And generally putting these in the areas you don't want to add flock to later. Next up is a coat of gesso for the entire thing. And while that is drying, we're going to make some interior bits. So cutting some small lengths of balsa wood, we are going to make a log pile. And you can just add a bit of variation, so you have some triangular pieces, some more square ones, or even some circular ones. And just cut a bunch of these and glue them together. And you want to be careful with the hot glue here, otherwise it can end up overlapping and having weird kind of glue blobs in the middle of a wood pile. and we want to make that about the right length to fit in either lengthways or sideways inside the lean-to. And then, making a rectangular cube from 2 bits of foam, we're going to make the basis for a chest, and we're going to glue some small, thin pieces of balsa wood around each side of it. And giving it a slight overlap, so the top sits snugly against the base. And I find it a lot easier to overhang and then trim later, and then fitting the end pieces cut to measure. And then you can add either plasticard or some thin bits of balsa around the outside as a kind of bracing structure for the chest. And I didn't bother putting a base on because it will probably never be seen. And I also built a small pile of stones from leftover bits of styrofoam that were left on my desk. And now that the gesso is dried, we're going to give everything a coat of mid-brown. And this includes the little interior pieces we made as well. And if you want to, you could give these a prep layer of gesso as well. But for now, I'm just going in with the brown and painting them all the same uniform colour. And then going in with a mid-grey and hitting the stones for an initial highlight. Before hitting the main piece with a kind of beige colour, so it's the same brown but with a bit more white mixed in. And giving it a fairly heavy dry brush over the entire piece. Then going in with a bit more white into the grey we used earlier, just giving a very light dry brush onto the wooden beams, as well as painting the stones on the base. And this will make the wood look a bit more weathered, as well as pick out a bit more of the edge details. And then we're going to darken it all down and weather it with a very watered down black paint. And we're going to go in and we're going to hit all the wooden beams and let it sink into the grain and bring the colour down a bit. And this is going to make it look a lot more like weathered old wood that's been left out in the elements. And giving the same treatment to the timber pile as well as the chest. And that will just help to really emphasise the detail and any crevices. Next, with a tiny amount of green paint, we're going to do the same process. So mixing it in with a lot of water, we're going to go in and just tint the base of the wood. So anywhere you'd have mould or mildew or rot building up or any kind of plant life starting to appear. So generally the lower 50% of the piece is a good idea. As just a loose guideline for it. And then going in and applying it to the timber supports. And I'm generally going quite heavy here, but with a very diluted solution. And you can see where I put it on a bit too thick there, just wetting the brush, and you can kind of disperse it onto the other places. And I'm trying to pull it where it meets the dirt as well. Then, if you want to, you can go back to the beige mixture, add a little bit more white in, and use it to pick out any highlights. So generally doing it on the very top of the model is a good idea, because you get that fake lighting effect. Next, we're going to apply some static grass. So with PVA, going to go in and paint all over where we want the grass to be. And I left most of the front completely bare of the PVA because I want it to be kind of trodden in where people have been moving to and from and dragging stuff, so there would just be mud instead of any grass. But on the back of the piece, I want it to be entirely covered with a kind of grassy mound. So with a mid-green mix, and make sure you're using your static grass applicator safely. Do not rest the contact point on your leg and try and test the power. You only do that once, for good reason. And just going around and shaking the grass onto the PVA. And keep going until you get good coverage. And shake off the excess when you're happy with the coverage. Next, mixing up some clump foliage and some green flock with a little bit of PVA. We're going to make some bushes and shrubbery for the exterior. And I found using less PVA is a much better thing here because you retain some of the springiness and clumpiness. But if you want like a really condensed kind of foliage slime, then you can go for that as well. Just add a bit more PVA or a bit of water, and then that will really crush it down. But by adding less PVA, you make a kind of bouncier effect, and it retains some of its clumpiness. And just dabbing that around the outside, where I want there to be some bushes. Then, for some final details, we're going to add a few fallen leaves. I basically add these to everything I do at this point, and it's really worth investing in one of the little hole punch things. They are a really useful tool to add to your repertoire, and you can add leaves onto basically anything, and it adds a nice little level of detail. And once I've added a few leaves, going in with a few tufts, and strategically placing them to complement the piece. And then, just to darken down the effect of the bushes, with some very watered down black paint, just going in and dabbing it over the top. And this will just darken it down a bit, as well as make it a bit more dynamic, as it will seep into the recesses and make a bit more of a contrasting effect. But do be careful not to add too much water to the piece, because that can seep down into the sculptor model there, and that could potentially slip loose. But if that does happen, just put some more clump foliage over the top of it, or another tuft. And there we have the finished piece, and just adding the interior bits. So we've got the logs, a small pile of stones, and a crate. And this could be a little supply cache that an army is hidden, perhaps some rangers or wayfinders, or it could be a bandit encampment, or a farming kind of storage unit. It's a very versatile little piece, adds onto a lot of different boards, and goes really well with the dry stone walls I made the other day. But thanks for watching, guys. Catch you next time.